an incredible guest here with us, Brian Sampson, and he perfectly embodies purpose-driven leadership. He's one of the founders of Plug Technologies. He's leading nearshore firm staffing, Latin America talent, bringing that to the U.S. He's got a long journey. He's done this several times over too, as far as creating businesses and scaling them from zero to multiple millions ARR and tens of millions in valuation. And so he's got a lot of experience and wisdom, and I'm excited to dive into that. So, Brian, welcome to the show.
Hey, I appreciate you guys. Thanks for having me.
Yeah. So, and where are you out of right now? Which is interesting. We're in boring Kansas City, right? And so it's a little more fun where you're at.
I have been to Kansas City though, on both sides. Great barbecue, nice place to live for sure. But I also grew up in the Midwest. But for the last decade, I've lived in Oahu. We've got two little kids, and tough place to be to grow up.
Is it like sarcastically or for real?
It's a hard place to beat for
Oh,
our kids.
to beat. I thought you said to be.
Yeah,
Man, my hearing's going out too. No, I was gonna say because I love Hawaii, and I'm like, man, if I could have that lifestyle, and you could. I mean, and I think a lot of people are just like, it's fear or whatever. But I have my reasons, but I do like to get out to Kauai and stuff. So you're on which island out there?
yeah. So we're on Oahu. Most of the population of the state lives on Oahu. This is where a lot of people have probably heard of, not just Honolulu, but Waikiki Beach, the North Shore. So we're on the same island. We live more on the west side, which is more suburban. There's a few lagoons and resorts and stuff out there, but otherwise, we've got a Costco and a Target and all that stuff.
Oh man, so you're like a true American over there.
Yeah, yeah,
Very
and
different from Kauai. When I'd go down to Kauai, is a lot of luau's and little shop, which is nice and quaint. Get away and relax. Is man, there's like you said, nothing's beat that for me. Outside of Hawaii, just lush and tropical all the time. But as great as that is, getting there and enjoying that kind of stuff starts with creating income and wealth and freedom and success and lifestyle and balancing it so that you do have a family and kids and the things that you want to enjoy, and you can have both, right? And it's like it's never easy, and I think everyone knows that. If they don't, they eventually find out that it's not easy, but that's why it's so valuable, right? And if it was so easy, everyone would be doing it. So I want to dive in a little bit, into what you're doing currently, but then zoom out later and to kind of go through what you've learned, similarities. I think what a lot of people are going to get from this with you is going through it multiple times, right? There's a lot of people of, not saying that luck is in there, that still takes a lot of skill, but like going through it, growing from zero to multiple, 100 employees and, selling and exiting a company, doing it once is one thing, but doing it three times and on your fourth time doing it, there's a lot of insights that you can gather from correlation. And that's really what I want to maybe dive into. So Plug Technologies, let's talk about Plug. What is Plug? When did you start that? Kind of where, talk a little bit through what you learned from getting it from zero to where it's at right now. Maybe dive into that a little bit.
yeah, sure. So I'll share where it is today, and then how it all started. So today I've got a full-time president, and what Plug does is connects talent from Latin America to U.S. companies. We've done a little bit over 500 placements, and we do what's called like long-term contract staffing. So we'll place software engineers, marketing people, VAs, really anything that can be done remotely from the States can also be done remotely from Latin America. And Latin America is hot right now. Uh, Pre-COVID, nobody really worked remotely, so it was a little like all we really knew was you either work in the office in the States or you're offshore. And
Mm.
offshore was where everybody was kind of sending work to. There's three big countries that everybody's can kind of point their finger to. You've got India is like the IT center for the world. China's the factory for the world. And then you've got the Philippines, which is very common with entrepreneurs for virtual assistants, back office, operations people, medical billers, all types of stuff. And then all of a
They'll
sudden,
do anything in the Philippines.
yeah, yeah. But every country kind of's got their specialty, and the Philippines has really carved out their niche. I don't think they're going to beat India anytime soon when it comes to tech talent, but the Philippines is hard to beat when it comes to VAs. Like they know it, they do it well.
So,
But then,
little side note, we had a
yeah,
Philippines call center out there in Clark for on one of our lending companies for business lending, and yeah, I mean it's kind of a win-win-win for everybody, right? Like
yeah,
especially if you pay them fairly and overcompensated almost, cover all the benefits and all that stuff. The thing with us that we fell apart with there, just to bring up, and I think there's something to talk about with this, with your experience is, we had a manager over there, but we never sent anyone over. We never really cultivated it the same way we would have in the States, right? Just because it was, the cost benefit was over there, but not when you keep going over back and forth. Then it starts to get to be like, okay, do we keep it on shore? So I personally dealt with it, so I'm really curious and interested to dive into this stuff and see where do entrepreneurs need to be focusing in that world today, right? I think that's different too than it was 5 years ago, than it was even 2 years ago, and now you layer in AI, and all those pieces. So yeah, talk through some of that,
yeah,
if
sure. Yeah. So we've done over 500 placements. We're doing long-term contractor staffing, which means that you're hiring just like you would. You guys are in Kansas City, but let's say you hired somebody in Chicago, my hometown. There's still a distance. You're not driving and seeing each other all the time. So you want to get that right. You go through your job description, maybe a recruiter, internal or external, helps find candidates. You still need to figure out how to payroll them because they're in a different state, and the way the U.S. works, it's complicated, bouncing back and forth between, what different state taxes are and requirements and so forth. So it's very, very similar to that. And obviously, Kansas City and Chicago are in the same time zone. This is why there's so much excitement over Latin America. And I don't know why it was kind of skipped over, forever. In the growing up in the Midwest, we would hear all the time about, flyover states. And I think everyone just kind of flew over Latin America. They weren't really thinking about it. But just like the Midwest is a sleeping giant, full of tons of talented people, so is Latin America. And uh, COVID was like the accelerant, though. Once everyone figured out that we needed, we're cool with people working anywhere, we wanted them to be on our time zone. That was everything. And you had the Philippine call center you talked about. There's really no beating Asia when it comes to price. But I think what everyone's starting to wake up to is there's other things besides price that come into the equation. Um, if you want that call center to map to your hours, they're working. They're up at like 2 o'clock in the morning, and that leads to burnout. Like I don't know about you, but I'm not built for that. I don't want to.
I mean,
Like
it's a culture, it seems like over there that and when I talk to them, it's like the communities have adapted to the U.S. hours
yeah,
almost. But it is interesting, as you point out in Latin America. So I do work, missionary work down with Go Ministries in the Dominican. And I've seen the same thing, from a cost standpoint, I'm curious to dive into that. But from a talent standpoint, it's like, why is there not more?
yeah,
Being, and is it, I don't know if it's a risk from the government piece, which has kind of been there, but like, depends on where you're at. Right. But yeah, I'm curious,
yeah,
cause again, I feel the same way, Latin America from a lot of different verticals and not just from a staffing onshore, offshore, just from a lot of different industries being looked over. When there's a lot of different value and benefit there that everyone could win with, it's just, it's not being
yeah.
paid attention to. So,
Yeah, so let me kind of finish that part, and then I'll be happy to get
Yeah,
into
no,
more.
this yeah, and I'll just stop me because I tend to go down these tangents, but it's good. So
Yeah,
yeah, go ahead.
yeah. So with the Philippines and India and China, so there's a couple things because I think the time zone is just a huge piece of this. There's a lot of other things that I'll get into. So like why people try nearshoring is they kind of get burned out from the time zone. I talk to a lot of software engineering managers, leaders, founders that like something's got to give. Either somebody's doing a call at midnight just to accommodate their team, or somebody in Asia is getting burnt out. Because by the way, even if they're working third shift and the community is kind of built around that, the schools aren't, at 3 o'clock in the morning. Like you still have to, if you have a family, you still have to get your kids off to school, and I mean, it's hard. Like there's a lot of burnout there. So people generally move back to the day shift. So you lose some of that talent. There's kind of this turnover there. The uh, the thing that I think is like really unlocked it though, um, is now there's different pieces of Latin America that have their different specializations. I happen to have lived in Argentina before. I lived there for about a year, and Argentina is great for software development. Brazil is great for like AI and data engineering. But as we're talking about the Philippines has some heat on them because Central America is becoming very quickly a strong rival. And Central America is on the same time zone as the center of the country, right? Nicaragua, Costa Rica, El Salvador, by the way, 10 years ago was like the most unsafe place in the world. Right now, it's the safest country in all of the Americas.
Hmm.
Like they've really cleaned this stuff up. Honduras, young, energetic talent that speaks not only English, but like our style of English. And nobody really talks about that. Like they say, yeah, the Philippines speaks English, India speaks English. But have you ever had a conversation and it just kind of feels a little scripted, or it doesn't feel like,
That's exactly why we shut it down over in the Philippines was we had, we were working with business owners on financing for loans, right? And what would happen was they could handle a conversation with a business owner that was doing 100, 200, 300, 500,000 a year in revenue. But then once you talk to a business owner that was, a CEO of a $10 million a year company, it'd fall off, fall off, fall off. And it was just the understanding of the complexity across different, correlation of ideas and just like things you just don't get not growing up in the United States, not so much English. I feel like it's more of a cultural disconnect
yeah,
than, and a little bit of the language, but I think there's as much the cultural where that's interesting you bring that up because yeah, it's like you look at the costs overall, but what is the efficiency cost? And that's what it was for us is it was an efficiency cost. The time and energy spent of US hours to manage it or to improve it when it kind of was spinning its wheels almost. It wasn't losing money, but it wasn't as profitable as it could have been if you had people that understood English like people I've worked with in the Dominican, to be honest, like they understand even down there, like, right? And that's not even near what you're talking about in Argentina and some of these other
yeah,
countries, right? So even there though, is what I'm saying is like you make a really good point. Interesting.
yeah, absolutely right. I mean, just to further like double click on that, that's an awesome example. I hear stories of people that, and I don't know what airline you guys are loyal to, but usually if you have an issue with United Airlines, you'll get rerouted to a call center in the Philippines. And let's say you love United Airlines, like you love flying United Airlines, you love the in-seat experience, you love the check-in, the gate agents, the lounge, all that stuff. But um, you need to call the airline. And if you got something really simple, to your point about like the $200,000 business owner, you got something really simple. Hey, I just want to change my seat. No problem, Mr. Austin. We'll figure this out. But if you got anything more complicated that's not within that box of a script, you're in trouble. imagine, hey, I'm going to fly from Kansas City to Denver, but actually I want to do a quick layover in Calgary and then go to San Francisco, but I want to use my miles for just the part from Calgary to San Francisco. Like their head will explode, because it's outside the script. The Philippines has been built, and this is where I'm actually worried about the Philippines with AI coming. The Philippines has been built for very specific processes for VAs to follow. And it puts a lot of pressure. A lot of people that are listening to this podcast are small business owners. And it puts an enormous amount of pressure on you as the business owner when you hire a VA, because they're like, give me the exact instructions, tell me the exact process. So now, like, everything you do, you've got to document it, and it's good business practice. But like, hey, like I suck at that stuff, and I think a lot of business owners can relate to that. Like, we're just busy running our own business. Can someone just fix this problem for me? Can someone figure it out? So with that United Airlines example, they had an amazing experience all the way through, but then they had a horrible experience with the call center. And now United Airlines is labeled as this company that just doesn't get me. They don't like me. They don't value me. So I'll churn, right? Even though everything else with the airline is great. And that's what the cost trade-off is really happening. So let's say, even the onshore.
And why did they, I mean, from a standpoint, it sounds like it's just a lack of awareness around their data. I mean, because if you're running data analytics on that, you're probably, if it's deep enough analytics and connected to the user and what happens after that call center and experience, but I just know that how fast things are moving with AI, people aren't keeping up on that, what I've seen in the last year for sure. So they don't know, sometimes.
Yeah, there's just a lot of people that will churn, because I don't think corporate's kind of recognizing that the call center is the issue, right? Like when you narrow down all the variables, and people are churning. But let's say you've got the other example, like the FAR example is Utah is like the call center of the states, right? Like neutral accents. They've got big call center buildings out there, lots of call center talent. So let's say you pay somebody $20 an hour in Utah, or $6 an hour in the Philippines. So it's $14 an hour. Like, it's not inconsequential, but is that $14 savings worth losing customers for life that would spend thousands and thousands of dollars a year? I think that's like the big miss here is if you have a business where if you're just a process-driven person, you've got an 18-step process for everything, the Philippines is your saving grace there. But if there's anything complexity, if you need people to think outside the box, to have a conversation that goes off script, and even if they don't know the answer, they're able to ask the right questions, think on their feet. This is where Latin America has really thrived.
So what are you seeing there from like a cost standpoint, because I see similar, I mean, that's where we were at, I think, when you had benefits and taxes and all that over in the Philippines. I think we were around that 5-6 an hour was pretty fair and, a little above average for US companies, asking what we're asking. But I see, that was, again, the same thing was we saw the data, right? And that's why we nixed it after we tried it for a year. We ran it for a solid year, and great people, amazing humans. It just, again, it was like, okay, we were in a facade. It was almost like you think things are working, but when you pull it all through, it's like the only thing that flowed through were the smaller stuff, right? You just were blocked at the very beginning because you didn't understand that it was the quick hang up was not just because of that. It was because of what the intellectual conversation was. off the bat. And I think people, the bigger businesses they run, the more shit they've seen, the more stuff that people have tried on them, and they're just more aware, right? And so it's like you have to have somebody that's got, and I think at the end of the day, like if you do have something that's more complex than just a step-by-step process, like you owe your customers the value,
That's
right?
right.
You owe the customers that value. And so, so what do you see in Latin America? Give me some examples of certain
Yeah.
countries and, how
Yeah.
you're bridging the difference between the 6 in Philippines and the 20 in Salt Lake, or Kansas City for even, right? It'd be the same kind of concept.
Yeah, let me give one more example, and then I'll jump right in. So how did I even get into this world? Um, I was uh, I was helping someone in my network who and I came up through the recruiting world. So I was a like head of recruiting out in San Francisco for some tech startups, and I didn't really like know a ton about Latin America, but I knew a few people there, and I had a friend of mine who ran a recruiting project management company. So they would take on these big recruiting projects like glass manufacturers that have to hire, 100 technicians every summer, to be on the line, or like forklift operators, blue collar guys, right? And they were struggling. They could not connect to these people. These guys, like, they're not on Indeed or LinkedIn. Like you just gotta pick up the phone and call them. So it's like cold call recruiting, right? They were using India to do this. So imagine you're like a forklift operator in Des Moines, and you're getting calls from recruiters in India. Like it's just not clicking, right? Now, if you're a software engineer, you get a recruiter call from India for a technical job. It's one thing, but it just wasn't working on the blue collar side. So we tried to do this I tried to help them. We did this from Colombia. The accent was perfect, and it was a huge success. And then we ended up growing that to 14 recruiters, just like taking care of all their blue collar hiring. Because I think there's a lot
Literally
more.
just
Yeah,
shifting the cultural background of the call center.
that's right. That's right. Yeah, it was huge. But you asked a great question of like, what does this really cost? What is the differentiator? Now, I'm going to assume that when you had your Philippine center, that was a DIY. Like you guys didn't have
Yeah,
people.
yeah, yeah, yeah. We just, I mean, we had the bandwidth, we had the people that had
Sure.
done some stuff, they had passed like we had our manager already to
Sure.
start it, right? So like we were kind of given a little bit of a golden ticket versus just like saying, "Hey, let's go figure it out." So,
Yeah.
yeah, but our cost was a little lower than if we were to use a
Yeah.
firm and a staffing agency per se, right? But we also got what we got, right?
Yeah. Sure.
We had the time. I was younger, we were all younger, and we just had the time to let's mess around with it, right? But as we get bigger and as money fixes things quicker than what the time and energy input is, and we've seen that too many times now. I think it's valid to look at the full scope from both perspectives. I think, right, the DIY model and the pros and cons of the DIY model and the pros and cons of a managed model.
That's right. Yeah. Yeah. So the DIY model, I think it's great for companies that are maybe looking for like one person, pilot it out, test it out, do a second. There's all sorts of platforms out there, like Upwork and Fiverr. Make your own hires, make your own mistakes. You'll get some successes too. Go for it. But I think the second you want to scale, it's usually good to use a firm. So now we're doing like apples to apples. If you're going to use a firm, say in the Philippines, you're probably closer to like $10, $11 an hour because they've got overhead margins, things that they want to build in. But you're usually getting the IT figured out. Everyone's in one office. Office rents, renting the desks, all that stuff kind of comes into play. Payroll, things like you mentioned. So that $10 or $11. If you do the same thing in say Nicaragua, probably 14. So it's more expensive than 11, significantly less expensive than Utah. Um, but now what you're really trying to measure is not the cost, but the arbitrage and the quality, right? So if your minimum cost is $11 an hour, so it's not like you're comparing 14 from Nicaragua versus 0. You need it. So then it's 14 minus 11 is 3. Are you going to get more than $3 an hour of return on that? I think you're going to get way, way more than a $3 return.
Mm-hmm.
You're going to get everybody's working when the sun's up. If there's any issues, anything like quick Zoom call, all the training, you send an email, gets returned right away. Like this is a collaborative operation. Number one. Number two, you get people that can um, that can think on their feet, right? So let me tell you the underlying reason why. Latin America, it's not known by everybody, right? 25% of Americans have a passport. Very few are going to, Peru or Chile. Like maybe they'll go to the all-inclusive resort in Mexico, in Cancun. But beyond that, they're not really traveling a ton. So their exposure to it's a little bit different. So then they go to like what's on Netflix or like what's in the newspaper. And this is all true, by the way. Like there are cartels. Okay, like we're not trying to deny that. Um, the the president of Venezuela, yes, was captured, on a helicopter raid. Argentina's got wild inflation, like up and down. Those are all true, but everything I just mentioned has to do with the leadership, not the people. And that's the juice right there, because the people have had to live under this chaos. And if you lived under this chaos for decade after decade after decade, what does it do? It makes you scrappy, makes you adaptable, flexible, calm under chaos, not afraid of problems, being really good at finding workarounds and stuff. And recognizing that if you really want to raise your income, you have to fully adapt to the U.S. Not just speak English and like be accommodating to U.S. hours, but like fully immersing yourself in U.S. culture. These guys are watching the same Netflix shows we are in English. They know all the slang. Probably when you went to the Dominican, maybe you felt like that. Like, wow, like I'm having a conversation almost like I would with somebody in Kansas
Yeah,
City.
even not. I mean, you would assume that at like a resort style, but even just in the in the capital and in the city, and even out into different parts of town and stuff. The where they were taught English, where they had the chance at least, right? And I think you get out of that, third world feeling of that in a lot of the places you're talking though. Yeah, that's interesting. So you scaled this company now. You're at, I think you're over 100 employees now, right? So talk us through just zooming away from nearshoring, and I love that we dove into that. I mean, we'll maybe dive back into it a little bit more from a different angle, but I want to talk just kind of to the entrepreneur that's hiring, whether it's U.S. based, somebody in Kansas City that's hiring their first 2 or 3 employees, their 50th employee, near shore, offshore, onshore, and SpaceX, outer space, who knows, right? But so talk me through, what are some of those things that you were thinking of from employee 1, 2 to 10 versus like what you are thinking about at like 30, 40, 50, 100, right? What are some key differentiators that you need to be more focused on in those first several versus as at scale?
Yeah, so I think the perspective I'll bring to it is I came up through the recruiting ranks, and I was the guy at these tech startups in San Francisco where as soon as they raised capital, all eyes were on me because this is 10 years ago, 15 years ago, where when they raised capital, it was actually spent on people. Today it's spent on data centers.
I've seen the decks have transitioned over the last 5 to 10 years from your allocation of capital to humans versus AI and tech, for sure.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. Yeah. So at least back in like the glory days of software as a service, SaaS companies, which is where I was operating, as soon as they raise capital, typical example is, all right, we just closed our Series B round for $20 million, valuing the company at 100 million. We need to hire 30 engineers in the next 6 months. And like, that's a tall order when you think about like the hiring bar and everybody's like a make or break engineer. And, like the valuation, the talent you get is the company you build, right? So there's a lot of pressure there. And maybe where I saw um, the good stuff, and then like things that other people can learn from. When you're in these tech startups, there's a different kind of pressure because you're raising real capital from investors. And for those that are on the call that have raised capital from investors, I have too. I raised $2 million a long time ago for a business, and stressful. You got investors breathing down your neck. They're questioning your decisions. They want returns. It doesn't matter if it's $100 million or $100,000. Like, investors want to see their capital come back to them. So when you're thinking about hiring, you want to of course give yourself some breathing room. Um, but I really go back to that like arbitrage example of, if you could get somebody where, maybe they're like 20% more, but they return 80% more, on the output, like that's how we should look at it. I think often we zoom right into like, what's the cheapest person? And I'll just like make it work because entrepreneurs are so optimistic. And I've been in that boat too, where we just think like we've got hubris, like anything we touch is we're gonna make it work just by sheer force of will. But uh, if you can spend a little bit more, oftentimes you're going to get like magnitude, multiples of return. The second thing is,
But on that first one, I want to stay on that real quick. I will second that 100 times, and it's a fear mechanism at every level, at
yeah,
every stage. No matter how many times you've done it, it gets better. But like, oh, I've just noticed it myself. But yes, every time you make that leap of faith, basically of like spending the extra to get the right one and the talent. But then I would push back on like, how do you iterate that quicker so that you're
mm,
not, how do you understand what that mark is, right? How do you iterate quicker? And then how do you make that decision quicker, right? Because I think it's more in the mental than it is, yeah, I understand I need good talent that can take things off my plate and not just be another nuisance. And I'm going to have to pay, and I get what I pay for. So I think, that's all obvious, but it's that like proof that I'm comfortable going there, and you're not going to be, but like, how do you talk through that side of it too, as well? And then I want to hear your other point.
yeah. I mean, I think there is that element of like just what you said. You do get what you pay for, and sometimes expectations can be out of sorts too. Like I've seen clients that, we get all shapes and sizes. We've got several billion-dollar clients today, and they're not so worried about like the cost. They just want quality that's going to stay long term. But we'll work with small entrepreneurs too. And um, we've all kind of seen the meme of like wire, 50K wire sent, just like that. And then there's the other person who's like, all right, like here's my $200 payment. You better make this perfect, or like it's gonna crush my company. um, I think sometimes we tend to, when and by the way, I've been that entrepreneur, like the one, this is my $200 check. You can't screw this up, and I'm going to be hovering over you every second. I've been that guy. Um, but it's not good for anybody, and I think our expectations are like wildly outdated. So where I just try to like reconcile all that is, This is just like a game of many levels. I don't know if you're a baseball guy, but I use the analogy of like single A, double A, triple A, the
Hmm.
majors, and that's how I look at things with like talent. That's how I look at things with clients. Like you got to master rookie ball before you go to single A. You got to master single A before you go to double A.
Well, and I just went to a Royals game the other night, and you have two concepts there though too, right? You have Yankees traditionally, where you just pay to fix the problem. They understand that, but you also can do that where, or do you have to get forced into being the farm team that just gets really good at creating your own talent from the ground up, right? And at the end of the day, it's more valuable, but it also on the front end, it takes more time and energy and effort. And do you know what you're doing at the end of the day? And if you didn't the whole time, then you're really screwed. But if you at least knew what you were doing, I think, in the long-term vision and value, you can do it either way, but there are prerequisites, in some of that. And so, but yeah, from the baseball now, it's a funny one you brought up because yeah, getting through that, and I think and with them, there are some semantics around the economics, but I think there is still truly like, are we going to invest that much in one individual human? And I think it's like the confidence you have, and there's a relationship and culture pieces to it as well, right? Of can somebody thrive in the environment that is that type of pedigree, right? Do you have a big enough vision that you're going to attract talent that isn't going to be smothered day one, seeing that they can't really thrive where you want them to be? And I think that's a lot of it too, is even when you make that decision to step over that and say, okay, I'm going to spend 20% more to get the right person for this, right? That has the experience, has the connections, has a lot of the things that like, yeah, they'd figure out in a couple years, but like I need to do it now. And you end up seeing way more than 20%. It's like 300, 400, sometimes thousands of percents of stuff that you just never would have ever attained or thought of or had access to. And so I think those are some of the intangibles. Same back into the call center thing. It's just at every level, right? From executives down to call center to whatever. So, yeah. And then I want to hear on your other point on that.
Oh, just the other point is where I think companies tend to go wrong, and this is a very natural mistake. Everybody does it. Usually, your first 10 hires are either people you know directly or somebody in your new company knows directly. And like the on the good side, everybody trusts each other, but on the bad side, like you're pretty homogenous really quickly, and you all kind of think a very similar way. The first thing I usually try to do, the very first company that I had in Latin America, we grew to 85 engineers. First person I hired was a recruiter, and immediately gave me access to people that I probably would have no idea who they were, and it changed the culture for the better.
What
It
size?
changed.
At what size were you when you hired a recruiter? Because I think that's important. I have a similar story when I hired my first HR manager, HR director, recruiter. Same
He was
probably
he was number
concept.
one. Yeah.
Number
So
one, number one, yeah.
yeah, yeah, first employee. Um,
And that's your business, right? I mean, you're a staffing, that's kind of part of the
well,
model.
that business was a software business.
Oh, okay. So it wasn't even staffing. So and I wanted to make sure it applied in your mind. Yeah, that makes sense. So first time I hired my first like HR director that's dedicated to not revenue, but people. And I think that's the big hang up with a lot of people is those non-revenue roles as well, that you don't understand how much value that takes and how much that takes off everyone else's plate that are performing under where they could be, right? And you don't see that lift either. But yeah, sorry, I lost my train of thought on that. So okay, yeah, I want to dive in. So yeah, let's keep talking about that as far as the piece of getting over that hiring, right? Like the recruiter idea, because we didn't do it until we were like probably employee number like 12 to 15, right? And I wish I would have done it sooner in that company, right? And I think, does everyone, everyone can't afford to do that day one because like you can only afford one person maybe or two people. So if you got to go through that, that way, and you're just a normal operating company, I mean, cash strapped, where do you see that inflection point where people should start looking at it? Because they can't all do that, day one in a startup.
Yeah, well, I guess it depends what you're looking at from a capital standpoint, right?
Let's say bootstrapped versus a $2 million VC backed, right? I think you have two different strategies. I'd be curious to hear you dive down both.
Yeah, sure. Well, I mean, the good news about having some capital is you can make some mistakes. Right? You've got a lot of pressure to get it right, but you also have some money to make mistakes. On the bootstrap side, which by the way, I've had a couple of those that turn into multi-million-dollar companies. The very very early on, I made my share of mistakes. I think with hiring, um, I would say that usually the first hire that early stage founders make that they shouldn't make is sales. We often, even if you're really bad at sales, and a lot of founders kind of have their sweet spot, like their domain expertise, like maybe you run a plumbing company and you're really good with pipes. Maybe you're a cleaning person, and you're so that means like hiring is not our specific sell. Sales isn't our particular superpower. But if you but customers love talking to founders. So where I'm trying to connect the dots here is that if you can hold off that sales hire for as long as possible and you do the sales, you'll recognize that customers love talking to the founder of the business. They love talking because no one's going to have more passion. No one's going to know the product, the service, the problem better. If you do that sales hire first, you're kind of thinking, like, all right, this person is going to energize my revenues. Um, don't wait. You sell, you deliver, and then you find leverage on the delivery side.
I would say that is probably one of the biggest points you mentioned here for that
Yeah,
guy, that new startup, founder, is if you don't know what is right or wrong or good or bad or inefficient or efficient, like you're so blind hiring. I agree
yeah,
with you 100%. I mean, and I think founders get this idea that like, oh, I'm a tech founder, I'm an XYZ, or I'm that or this. It's like, no, every CEO needs to be sales. Like, yeah, yeah, you're technical, or yeah, I'm more on the operations or the accounting or whatever. But it's like, no, at the end of the day, you got to understand what you're hiring for, right? And if you can't afford it, then you got to do it for a while to understand what, at least get yourself 80, 90% there. Yeah, great point. Okay, so I want to wrap up here a little real quick. There's a couple other things I wanted to dive into. So you're a marathon runner, and you mentioned a couple of kids, and we had talked about it before, but and I know we don't have time to dive into it. Maybe we'll do it on another deal here. But just real quick, balancing all your businesses and stuff, but still having time for your family and to do marathons and to, deplete and like recharge and just all that. Talk through, maybe you just leave everyone with something like that of what is something that you realized that you weren't doing earlier on that you really do now more, maybe not all the time, but like you just noticed like, hey man, that's one thing that 10
yeah.
years ago versus now that I do that I'm so thankful that I have in my life and I'm doing because it allows for that.
I'll say that being type A is overrated. I think I've been a type B guy forever, which means I try to find shortcuts and workarounds. And I mean, even when I was a W-2 employee at these tech startups, um, I would roll in around 11:30 in the morning, so I had plenty of time to work out, eat a nice breakfast. Um, when I had to stay till like 9 o'clock at night for these crazy San Francisco hours, I would, but most of the time I left at 4. You gotta you gotta make your life the priority first, and then you build everything else around it. I've had some wins as an entrepreneur. I've had some losses too, but uh, everything is second. and you just hear all these hustle culture stories of people killing themselves. Like, you got to work 100-hour weeks all the time. You don't. You just got to work smarter.
I love that. And it does explain the 11:30 in the morning at why you live in Hawaii. I am again envious. I'm definitely going to come visit you next time out there. So Brian, I really appreciate it, man. I think people got a lot out of that. How can they connect with you, with Plug, with you? We'll put a bunch of stuff in the show notes, but if there's one spot that you want people looking for you at, where would that be?
Oh, I appreciate that. Plug Technologies is our website, plugg.tech. And we get all sorts of inbound people that are nearshore curious. They want to learn more about Latin America. No strings attached. We'll tell you all about it.
Love it. Love it. Well, thanks again, and appreciate you coming on.
All right. Thank you so much.
All right. Take care.